Dr. Kathleen McGraw has been the Chief Medical Officer at BMH for 8 years. I've known her for that entire time because, as many of you know, my wife is a colleague of hers and runs the hospitalist program, which is within that medical officer responsibility of Kat. Kat has also taken on the position of Chief Information Officer for BMH, and she also provides clinical care to patients as a hospitalist. Before BMH, she was at Bay State Franklin in Greenfield, where she established that hospital's hospitalist program. Ours was established by Carolyn Taylor Olson, who, if you ever see her around, you should thank her for. Kat is also on the board of VAS, VAHHS, the Statewide Hospital Association, and she's a chair of that association's Chief Medical Officer Committee. In that role, as chair of that committee, she's been working with all of the CMOs throughout the state to coordinate their responses to COVID and ensuring that all the hospitals are learning from each other in this process, and has also been representing VAS on Vermont's COVID Vaccine Advisory Committee, helping to develop the rollout of the vaccine response in Vermont. Dr. McGraw.
Thank you. So, well, thank everybody, I want to thank everybody, some very familiar faces and some new ones for inviting me to come here and speak a little bit about COVID and the COVID vaccine. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully this will go smoothly. Let's see. All right. Are you seeing my screen here with my slide?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Now I'm going to see if I can get it to do the slideshow. Are you still seeing the slideshow?
Yes, we are.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to start with a little bit of some basic information about COVID in Vermont right now. And I recognize not everybody may follow it quite as closely as I do. So here are some facts to start out with. So our COVID cases are rising here in Vermont. As folks may or may not be aware, we've had over 8,000 positive cases since the beginning of this pandemic here in Vermont. In Windham County, we get to look at how many tests are positive on a day-to-day basis, but there's also tallying it on a 2-week basis, a rolling 2-week average. And we have had 152 positive tests in Windham County in the past 13 days. And for comparison, this very same number a month ago was only 91. So that tells you that cases really are on the rise right now. We're seeing some bump, a post-holiday bump, along with just, I think, COVID fatigue. Statewide, our 7-day positivity rate is about 2.8%. That's kind of similar to where it's been for a while. It does tell us that we're doing adequate testing for the amount of COVID that we have here. So that's good. BMH, we have been testing and testing and testing. We have done nearly 13,000 tests since the beginning of the pandemic, which is just tremendous, but it's really the service that our community needs to be able to know who has it and how to appropriately quarantine and protect ourselves. So the best place for statistics for Vermont really is the Vermont Department of Health website. It's updated regularly, it's accurate, and it's really the resource to go to. It's also the same resource that you can go to find out information about quarantine or testing or get your tests scheduled or any of that kind of thing. So it's highly valuable. If you have not been there, you should definitely check it out. So to understand about the COVID vaccine, which is really what I want to focus on the most today, is I think we first need to take a quick look at vaccines in general. I'm going to start with that. And this is a cow that has cowpox. It is a ceramic version of it because I didn't want to spoil anybody's lunch with any gruesome photos today. So vaccines have been used for pretty much forever, nearly, because the earliest evidence we have of vaccination is about 1000 AD, where Chinese doctors ground up smallpox lesions and had their patients sniff them. And that was kind of the earliest approach to vaccination. In the Western world, we were slower to figure out the beginnings of vaccination. But in the 1700s in England, it was noticed that milkmaids got cowpox, which you see represented here. And they got that's a fairly mild disease. But then it was noticed that they never seemed to get smallpox. And it was realized that the scraping up against the cow flanks that had these pox was causing wounds on their skin that got infected and gave them the cowpox, but then protected them. So folks started scraping off the cowpox and scraping them onto their own arms for protection, and it worked. So then, and that was in the late 1700s. So then in the 1800s, the concept was more understood and a lot of different vaccines began to emerge. And now in 2021, we're way more sophisticated. Nobody has to scrape anything into their skin that comes from an animal. And so we have a much more sophisticated approach. Now we have tons of vaccines, and over a dozen of them are required for entrance into daycare, elementary school, colleges, and their names are familiar to us: polio, mumps, diphtheria, tetanus. And now we're so routinely protected against these illnesses that we here, most of us don't have personal memory of how deadly many of these diseases were, or how groundbreaking it was when these vaccines emerged and provided protection. But many of our parents or grandparents, in fact, do remember. And the vaccines at that point in time were as groundbreaking to them as the COVID vaccine is to us now. So you might wonder how a vaccine works, and I think it's actually helpful to understand a little bit about this so that you can understand the COVID vaccine specifically. So the basic concept is that you have a vaccine shows your immune system a germ, or also called an antigen. And in this cartoon, it's represented as those yellow balls. And so the vaccine shows your body that germ in some way and allows you to build up an antibody to it, similarly like you would if you were sick, only in this instance, you're not getting ill with it. And your body keeps these antibodies in your circulation at very, very tiny levels long afterwards, and in some cases permanently. And so then the next time that this germ shows up on the scene and is presented to your immune cells recognize them and send out a signal, manufacture a whole lot of antibodies, the specific correct antibody, and those antibodies then come and attack it. And when they all connect up like that, your body recognizes it as something that needs to be destroyed and gotten rid of. So there are a couple of ways that this gets accomplished. Some vaccines, as you probably all remember, some vaccines are a live virus that is weakened. And so it allows you to get a tiny, tiny bit of a really inhibited germ that can't actually really make you sick, but allows you to build immunity. And the measles vaccine is a good example of that. Some vaccines use an inactivated or killed germ, and so they can't cause the disease because they're dead. And an example of that is the polio vaccine. And then there are some toxoid vaccines that use the product of the bacteria or the toxin and give you immunity to that, because it's the toxin that itself that makes you sick. And one such vaccine, that flavor is the tetanus vaccine, which I expect most of you have all had. And then there's one other category, which is includes a number of different vaccines that all use a piece of something that belongs to the germ that allows your body to use it, but not the whole component. And this new mRNA vaccine that we hear about with the COVID fits in that category. And so it just uses a very small piece of the COVID complex to provide the needed information to build immunity. But speaking of immunity, let's sidetrack for a minute. What's this thing called herd immunity? People heard of herd immunity, right? It's in the press a bit. So what this concept is, and I think it's good to know, is that if almost everybody is immune to a disease, then the disease can't spread from person to person successfully. And if there is one or two people who aren't immune, they're going to still be prevented from getting the disease because the disease isn't in circulation. So what does this mean in real numbers? Because this has been batted around in the press quite a bit this year. Well, it varies by disease because different diseases spread more easily than others. So for example, measles is a super spreader. It spreads very, very easily. And so in order to prevent an unvaccinated person from getting the measles, you need to have 94% of the people in the population immune to provide that kind of protection. So that's a very, very high level. COVID has seemed to be somewhat less of a super spreader than measles, but it's similar to smallpox actually. And that requires somewhere in the neighborhood of around 80% immunity, which means about 80% of people have to be immune or the remaining people cannot actually get the disease. And that's significant because there are some people, excuse me, who cannot actually be immunized for a variety of medical reasons. So the concern is that we've recently had the discovery of a mutation that's making the COVID disease actually spread more easily. And so that if that plays out any length of time, that's going to change the amount of people who need to be immune to create this herd immunity. Let's talk about the vaccine specifically for COVID. So to start out right now, we have two vaccines available, Pfizer and Moderna. I think somebody mentioned earlier they had one person in their family who got Pfizer, the other one who got Moderna. Both great. So broadly speaking, they work in the same way as other vaccines do, presenting your body with the ability to recognize and fight the disease despite never having had it. Both of these vaccines are mRNA vaccines, which I think is super exciting. So this is a technique that is been around for a couple of decades. It was developed in the 1990s, and it's been used in a number of vaccine trials. And what they do is they have a tiny lipid, it's called a lipid envelope. And really that just is a fat bubble. And it is holding a very small scrap of mRNA. mRNA is part of the instructions that your body uses to translate your DNA into protein. And so this piece of mRNA that's inside this lipid bubble is the segment that is the architectural instructions on how to build the spike protein. I think people have probably heard that the COVID disease has a spike protein. You see these cartoons of it, it's little red spiky things that stick out. So your body is getting the information on how to build that spike protein. Your body builds that spike protein, and then your body immediately recognizes it as foreign to your own body and creates an antibody to it and then destroys it. And you have created that antibody then that sticks around and gives you that needed immunity to anything that has the spike protein, which is at the same time just the COVID virus. So I think this is just brilliant and super exciting. I do hear concerns about people saying, well, yeah, great, but this is developed so quickly. I'm really worried about how, do we really know? Is it going to be good? Are there going to be problems? How do we know they didn't take shortcuts to make it happen so fast? Do we know it's safe? So I think there's some important things to know about the vaccine development as well as what it is. So vaccine development, the research and the development that goes into it is super expensive. Lots of time and research goes into finding the right components. The trials are very expensive, and they can take a long time, particularly if disease isn't around in high enough volume to be able to really quickly be able to prove whether or not it's being allowing somebody to be resistant to the disease. So in COVID, the amount of money that went into research and development was really, it was astonishing. But one of the really great things about it was that it came from a variety of different sources. It came from the government, it came from investors, and even celebrity donors contributing in a way that took expensive risk factor out of the development, out of the equation, and it let a whole lot of companies work really rapidly on the development, really simultaneously, because money wasn't actually holding them back. People like Dolly Parton donated $1 million to the Moderna research effort, which is very remarkable. There was also really worldwide scientific collaboration, which was incredibly helpful as well. Last January, some scientists from China and Australia did the sequencing of the entire COVID genome and made that public. So everybody had the same data, full transparency of the same data to work from right at the beginning, and really helped accelerate the development as well. Different parts of vaccine trials, you can think about them as happening sequentially usually because of, again, the expense. You don't want to be doing part 1, part 2, and part 3 if it's going to be a fail in part 1. You don't want to pay the expenses of part 3 until you know that it's going to be successful there. This allowed taking the financial risk out of it, allowed these components to happen simultaneously because the risk wasn't there. And so that actually helped improve this space. And then trials were able to happen and get the large number that they needed rapidly because the disease is so prevalent. It was much faster to be able to see whether or not people were being protected because the disease isn't rare. You know, people are being exposed all over the place. And so that was very helpful as well. mRNA vaccines, the technology used to manufacture them, it can be done very rapidly and at a high volume, which is very different than the manufacturing of like a killed virus, which actually has to use, or killed bacteria, which has to actually grow and kill this bacteria in a much more cumbersome way by comparison. And then lastly, the whole FDA process has a queue, and it is generally years long. And in this instance, all these coronavirus vaccines have been allowed to jump the queue and get in front of the line, which then dramatically shortcuts as well. So the total of all this means that the usual vaccine development process actually happened. All of these components did occur, but they happened in a way that was really, really streamlined. And the good news is that it was able to happen really quickly. And hopefully some of this streamlined process can be applied in the future to other urgent medication or vaccine needs as well. So far, this process has yielded 2 vaccines that have been given emergency use authorization. And this coronavirus vaccine tracker is from the New York Times. It's excellent. You can just look it up yourself. It's free. You don't have to be a subscriber. It gives a lot of detail about all of the vaccines that are in the various states. And it's worth a look to see what's going on out there. And you can see there are a lot that are in various phases. You might say, do we need these all? And the answer actually is yes, because our entire planet is at risk. All the population on our planet is at risk of coronavirus right now. So the total volume of vaccine that needs to be developed and delivered is really high. So the more organizations we have involved in creating these vaccines, really the better. So do I think these vaccines are vetted enough and safe? Yes, I do. And I got my second dose of Pfizer vaccine today. And should you get the vaccine? Yes, I do think you should. And you should get it as soon as it's your turn. So the question is, when is it your turn, right? So the vaccine rollout, approximately 77% of Brattleboro Memorial Hospital employees are vaccinated so far. About 90% of the medical staff has been vaccinated so far, 100% of our rescue, and we're continuing to vaccinate the community health care workers in the community as well. We expect this is all part of the phase 1A rollout. And as you can see, we've delivered over 1,000 doses already and are starting on the second dose delivery today. We're not done with our vaccinations. This first vaccination group is intended to cover healthcare workers and their support staff, skilled nursing residents and their staff, but we are not having to do that set of vaccination, and first responders. We do expect to be done with the first dose of this large group in about 10 days. Then it moves into the second phase, the phase 1B. And the priorities around who is in 1B have been changing around a bit. You've probably read that and seen it in the news. There's some guidance from the CDC, but it really is specifically defined at the state level. But the bottom line to keep in mind is really that the best use of the vaccine is to get it into people's arms. And the mechanics of the distribution, when there are a lot of qualifications that need to be evaluated and decided on in a person by person basis, like my diabetes is worse than your heart disease or your cancer, like that just is going to slow it all down. And really what we need is rapid delivery of this vaccine. And so the state is creating guidelines, which at the moment look like they're going to lean heavily on age as the primary way that it is rolled out next. BMH and really across the state, we're going to follow whatever guidelines the state puts together and ultimately decides on, so we can just protect the community as fast as possible. I want to thank you for letting me give you a tiny little tour of vaccines here, and I really do think that it's important to understand so that people feel comfortable getting the vaccine. Because I think it's really the tool to break this disease and get our lives back. So hopefully it's been interesting and has maybe answered some of your questions, but I'm happy to take more questions if you have some.
Thank you. Do we have questions for Kate?
How do we get on the list?
So right now there's not actually a list per se. So the decision and the publication about how those vaccines are going to be delivered still hasn't happened. It's likely that the Department of Health will be doing some larger mass vaccination throughout the community. It's not clear yet what that's going to look like, but it will be public when that happens. The number of people who need to be vaccinated is too many to do it just strictly through your primary care provider's office. And so that's why we have to look at other options on how to do it.
Phil? You have to unmute. Phil, you have to unmute.
There. Whoop.
Okay. No, you're back. You're muted again. You're muted again. Phil, you're muted.
Dr. McGraw, while we're waiting, when you said 100% for rescue, was that Rescue Inc. or personnel throughout the county?
It is the rescue personnel throughout the county, at least to our knowledge, that we have got 100%, yes. We've been doing significant reach out to all of the healthcare workers in our HSA, our healthcare service area. And so that includes the first responders, as well as our dentists and, primary care providers and others throughout the community.
Phil, give it another try.
I will try again. So, hi, Kat.
Hello.
Kat, do you think you could get a couple of doses and bring them home and take good care of your neighbors?
He's my next door neighbor.
Question.
Sherry-Ann?
Yeah. Where on the list are the people like the workers at the store and, that level?
Yeah. Excellent question. Hi, Sherry. There's been this issue about where do folks, essential workers, where do people with different chronic diseases fit? And this is one of the things that's been very difficult to parse out. Because is your job at the grocery store, where does that put you in the queue compared to the person at, I don't know, at the pharmacy counter, or all these different roles that people have that really are essential. There's also the question of essential jobs. Are they the frontline workers who are face to face, or are they the essential things that keep our community rolling? And if they took ill and go down, would that hamper the function of our community? There's more than one way to really define these essential worker categories. And so it has been very difficult. I know the state has been wrestling with it enormously. And so that's where this, and it has not actually been firmly decided. So I'm just kind of giving you a sneak peek, which is that from the conversations that I've heard, it's because the importance is in getting the level of vaccination up quickly, that choosing some ways that are readily verifiable and readily organizable it has become really the priority approach with it. It's not perfect for sure. I will tell you that the vaccine delivery that we've been doing, these first 1,000 doses, it's only 1,000 doses. That's a small part of our community, and it's been a huge, complicated lift. This is so much more complicated than the flu vax. So,
do you think the complication is primarily due because of the lack of vaccines, or primarily due, if we didn't have to, if you didn't have to decide who was going to get because of the quantity, okay, it seems it would be a whole lot easier.
It would be. It is complicated to keep track of. Also, when you get your flu vaccine, you need 1 dose. In this instance, you need 2 doses, and it depends on which vaccine it is. It either needs to be 21 days later if it's the Pfizer, or 28 days later if it's the Moderna. So there's a lot of just, cross complexity with it.
There's a couple of questions online, if I could read them to you. One is, we're a border state, so we've got people that work in Brattleboro and live in New Hampshire. Is there any idea that how that's going to go?
Excellent question. And I have a meeting, and when I leave this meeting, I'm hopping on to a statewide meeting, and that's one of the questions that I'm bringing up. Because I think that is a concern. We have that same concern, not just with respect to our community, but our patient population as well. So we have patients here that are part of our medical, who see people in our medical group who live in Massachusetts or who live in New Hampshire. As patients, would they get vaccinated here? Would they get vaccinated elsewhere? I don't know. There hasn't been any guidance to that yet.
And if you run out of time, just speak up. We really appreciate your being here. It's been a great program. The other question is, let's see, well, I think you've answered this, a broad sense of the timing of various groups, but I think that's driven by not knowing how the vaccine is actually going to be delivered to you. That's the bottleneck.
Yeah, I think, initially when it got started, we talked about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and then we split up phase 1 into being 1A, 1B, 1C. And the reality is this is 2021. Nobody wants to be phase 4. Everybody's a 1, right? We're all number 1. And so there's a desire to get this, and it has meant that the content of who's in what phases, not only has there been shuffling around, but there's just been complete shuffling around of what even phase means. So it's been changed a lot.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's the same but different with the PPP loans that the banks are dealing with. So it's a new experience, and hopefully we'll have good a memory in the next one. Jeremy, I see you've got a hand up.
I do. Thank you, President Carl. So, Dr. McGraw, although the clinical trials were all done with 2 doses, there's some indication that 1 dose does provide some immunity. And there is a lot of talk about actually, because of the restriction in availability of doses, of going around and giving giving as many people as possible 1 dose, and then returning after the 21 or the 28-day recommended period to give those people a 2nd dose. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I meant to mention that earlier. And there's one other component to it as well. Some people have been talking about half doses. So let me address the half dose piece first, which is to say that during the trials of the Moderna vaccine specifically, part of the vaccine trials for that looked at giving half doses to people under age 55. And the initial study information from that looked like those under 55 getting half doses had the same response as if they got a full dose, which is excellent news, fantastic, because it would double the volume of vaccine available that way. But it would still, they did not test that in age over 55. Now, I keep in mind, I just increased the complexity of vaccine delivery a ton if we introduce the concept of you need a half dose, you need a whole dose, etc. The FDA is currently looking at that. When it was approved for emergency use authorization, they did not take it into consideration or look at that, but they are looking at that. We will follow the guidance of the FDA, the federal, the FDA, the CDC, and our Vermont Department of Health. And when that becomes an option, we will definitely embrace that, but that is being looked at. The other thing that you're asking is about whether or not you could just have your first dose and not worry about getting a second or a third dose, no, there's no third dose, but not worry about getting your second dose and then let that go to somebody else instead. I think that the information about that is a little bit less clear. It's not clear how durable your immunity or your protection would be with that. So I think the jury is still out, but this half dose question, I think, has a little bit more legs, and I think we probably will hear some more about that.
Thank you.
Frank Rucker, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, President Carl, and thank you, Dr. McGraw, for getting us through this pandemic. My question for you is, given we're a little over 600,000 people in the state of Vermont, are there some sort of high confidence, broad timelines on when we might see, availability of the vaccine for, let's say, half of our people, and then, sort of the broad, 3/4 mark? Do you have a general timeline on that, or is it still really tough to predict based on the manufacturing issues?
So it's entirely dependent on the manufacturing issues. And so we do not have any kind of timeline for that. It's not as if we could even, any timeline we gave is completely made up. Because at the moment, even the allocation of the doses has been a little bit plus minus week to week. We've been able to pivot as necessary, and we've done fine with it. But we have seen in the state of Vermont, just like nationally, you've heard about, that we've been shorted doses. And so we've had to reorganize the timing of the clinics, et cetera, et cetera. So with that variability in play, there's no way we can predict. It does, again, speak to the importance of having some of these other vaccines coming into play, because then that's additional manufacturing processes that are going to work to do that. So AstraZeneca is, I think, the closest one, probably in February at some point. And then there is a different one by Johnson & Johnson, which only is a single dose. It's the only one that's single dose. But when that comes up, it will make it easier as well.
Thank you.
Dr. McGraw, a question. The Brattleboro Memorial Hospital has been really great in having these pop-up testing sites at the hospital. Is there any plan to have a pop-up site for the vaccinations?
So the pop-up site that you're referring to is actually, pop-up is kind of a misnomer. The Department of Health had been running pop-up or just, periodic stand-up clinics over the course of the summer for testing. And we took on testing in conjunction with them. It actually happens here at the hospital, right in the same place as our regular testing. And that is behind the Richards building. You register for a test online at the Vermont Department of Health website. You can find your way through there and do that registering. And it's been tremendously successful, and it's allowed us to have higher volumes of testing. So I think it stands to reason to say, well, couldn't we do that for vaccination? And I think in point of fact, that is the kind of thing that we're going to need to look at. However, testing, you get tested, you drive away. Same with flu shot, you get your injection and you go home, right? With this particular set of vaccines, there is of course, an additional little twist, which is that you do need to have an observation time. So you have to stay and have an observation of either 15 or 30 minutes, depending on a number of factors, following the vaccine. So it makes it a little more complicated to figure out that, but nevertheless, I think we are looking at trying to figure out how to do mass vaccination in some sort of self-registration, widely available way. It's not doable to have our population expect that they're all going to be able to get into the primary care office and get their vaccination in any kind of timely way. We have way too many vaccinations that need to be given for that to work.
Thank you.
We have passed our normal meeting time. So thank you very much, Kat. This was a great program. And challenges, we all recognize the challenges that the state and the hospital have in executing. You probably won't have anyone happy no matter how it happens. But the numbers have been kept down, so that's a good sign. And we have to do our part.
Indeed. Thank you very much for having me. If people have additional questions, you can always send them to me by email or reach out to me. My email is kmcgraw@bmhvt.org. It's the generic ending of the Brattleboro Hospital's emails. Anyway, so feel free to reach out to me if you want. And in line when it's your turn.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We'll call a meeting to adjourn.
All right.
That was a great meeting, well attended.